Grace Everett had been trained to expect the worst from her assignments, but nothing in her background check had quite prepared her for the reality of Julian Pierce. The helicopter blades slowed above them as Grace stepped onto the private helipad, her black tactical jacket already attracting the midday heat. Below sprawled the gleaming headquarters of Pierce Holdings, a pharmaceutical empire that had revolutionized cardiac medications and made its founder a billionaire before he turned 35. Now, at 38, Julian Pierce had a reputation that preceded him like a warning siren. Demanding, perfectionist, ruthless. The tabloids called him the Ice King of Manhattan. His employees called him worse when they thought no one was listening. Grace had spent 6 years in private security after leaving the Secret Service. She had protected heads of state, celebrities going through messy divorces, and tech moguls with stalker problems. She had expected another temperamental rich man who thought his money made him invincible. What she had not expected was the scene that greeted her in the executive suite. "This is completely unacceptable." The voice carried through the heavy oak doors before Grace's escort, a nervous assistant named Marcus, could even knock. "I specifically said the clinical trial data needed to be cross-referenced with the European protocols. Do you have any idea what happens if the FDA finds even one discrepancy?" Marcus winced and pushed the door open anyway. Grace followed, her hand instinctively checking the weapon holstered beneath her jacket, though the only danger here seemed to be the tall man standing behind a desk that probably cost more than her car. Julian Pierce was younger than he looked in photographs, or maybe it was just that the photos had never quite captured the intensity in his dark eyes. He stood well over 6 feet, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection, his dark hair slightly disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it. A man in his 50s stood across from him, his face red with either anger or embarrassment. "Mr. Pierce, your new head of security is here," Marcus announced, his voice barely above a whisper. Julian's gaze snapped to the doorway and Grace felt the full weight of his attention. Those dark eyes swept over her, assessing, calculating. She had been evaluated by dangerous men before. This felt different somehow, more penetrating. "You're late," he said flatly. Grace checked her watch, a practical military-grade timepiece. "I'm 7 minutes early, Mr. Pierce. My contract specified 10 o'clock. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe. People probably did not contradict him often. "The previous head of security was always here by 9:30, he said. "The previous head of security quit after 3 weeks, Grace replied evenly. Perhaps his hours had something to do with that. The older man seized the moment of distraction to slip toward the door. Julian's attention snapped back to him. "We're not finished, Richard. I'll have the corrected data on your desk by end of day," Richard muttered, practically fleeing. The door closed, leaving Grace alone with her new employer. Julian studied her for a long moment, and she returned the look with calm professionalism. She had learned early in her career never to be intimidated by wealth or power. They were just people, often more insecure than those who had less. "Your resume is impressive," Julian said finally, moving around his desk with controlled grace. "Secret Service, 3 commendations, expert marksman, fluent in 4 languages. You're overqualified for corporate security." "I prefer to think of it as being properly qualified for protecting someone who receives an average of 47 threats per month," Grace said. "That's what your file indicated. You've done your homework." "I always do." "Shall we discuss the security protocols, Mr. Pierce? Or would you prefer to continue questioning my punctuality?" For the first time, something that might have been amusement touched the corner of his mouth. It disappeared so quickly Grace wondered if she had imagined it. "Follow me," he said. "I'll show you what you're dealing with." The tour took 3 hours. Pierce Holdings occupied a 40-story building in Midtown Manhattan, and Julian seemed determined to inspect every inch of it. Grace took notes on her tablet, marking weak points, questioning existing protocols, and generally doing the job she had been hired for. What surprised her was that Julian not only answered every question, but seemed to genuinely consider her suggestions. "The underground parking needs better lighting," she said as they descended to the lowest level. "And these support columns create too many blind spots. We should install mirrors at minimum, additional cameras ideally." "The building manager said the current system was adequate," Julian replied, but he was already typing something into his phone. "The building manager isn't responsible for your safety. I am. And this parking garage is a security nightmare." He glanced up from his phone, studying her again with that penetrating gaze. "You're very direct. Would you prefer I wasn't?" "No." He returned his attention to his phone. "I'm messaging the building manager now. The upgrades will be completed by Friday." They rode the elevator back up in silence. Grace observed him from the corner of her eye. He stood perfectly still, his posture impeccable, but there was tension in his shoulders. She had seen it in other protectees, the weight of constant vigilance, of knowing that wealth and success made you a target. "When did you receive the last credible threat?" she asked. 2 weeks ago. Someone claiming to have information about contaminated product batches. It was investigated and determined to be false, likely an attempt at stock manipulation. And the one before that, a month prior, former employee terminated for cause, made threats against several executives including myself. He was detained and is currently awaiting trial. Grace nodded, adding notes. "I'll need access to all threat assessments, correspondence with law enforcement, and details on anyone who's been escorted from the building in the last year. I'll have everything sent to your secure email by this evening." The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, and they nearly collided with a woman carrying a stack of folders. Papers scattered across the polished marble floor. "Watch where you're going," Julian snapped, his voice cold enough to freeze. The woman, young and obviously new, scrambled to collect the folders. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Pierce. I don't want to hear excuses. If you cannot manage the simple task of walking down a hallway without causing chaos, perhaps you should reconsider your career choices." Grace watched the woman's eyes fill with tears as she gathered the last of the papers and hurried away. She turned to Julian, keeping her expression neutral despite her irritation. "That seemed unnecessary," she said quietly, his jaw tightened. "I expect competence from my employees." "She's an intern. Probably her first week. Everyone makes mistakes. Not in my company." Grace decided not to push further. It was her first day, and antagonizing her employer would not help anyone. But she filed the interaction away, adding it to her growing understanding of the man she was supposed to protect. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, security assessments, and what Grace was beginning to recognize as Julian's standard operating procedure: barking orders, dismissing suggestions, and generally treating his staff like incompetent children. By 6 o'clock, she had witnessed him reduce 2 executives to silent fury, make an assistant cry, and have a 15-minute argument with his director of research over the placement of a comma in a press release. Grace was in the security office, a small room adjacent to Julian's suite, reviewing camera feeds when Marcus appeared in the doorway. The young assistant looked exhausted. "He wants to see you," Marcus said. "Does he usually work this late?" "Usually. He's often here until midnight. Sometimes he sleeps on the couch in his office." Grace raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She found Julian exactly where Marcus had indicated, seated on a leather couch with his tie loosened and his jacket discarded. He looked more human somehow, less like the polished tyrant and more like a tired man at the end of a long day. "Your preliminary security report," he said, holding up his phone. "I received the email 10 minutes ago. Is there a problem with it?" "No. It's thorough, well-reasoned, and your recommendations are all practical. I'm approving the entire proposal." Grace had expected pushback, arguments, the same resistance she had encountered from other wealthy clients who thought they knew better than the professionals they hired. All of it. "You're the expert. I hired you for your expertise. It would be foolish not to listen to it." He set his phone aside and looked at her directly. "I also wanted to apologize for my comment this morning about you being late. You were correct about the time. I was wrong." Grace felt something shift in her perception of him. In her experience, powerful men rarely admitted fault, especially not to employees they had known for less than a day. "Apology accepted," she said. "You disagreed with how I handled the situation with the intern. It was not a question." Grace considered her response carefully. "It's not my place to judge how you manage your staff, but you have an opinion." "Everyone has opinions, Mr. Pierce. Sharing all of them is not always diplomatic." His mouth quirked slightly, that ghost of amusement again. "I appreciate diplomacy, but I also appreciate honesty. You've been direct with me all day about security matters. Why should personnel management be different?" Grace moved further into the room, maintaining a professional distance, but accepting what felt like an invitation to speak freely. "You hired me to keep you safe, not to give management advice. Consider it an expansion of your job description." She studied him for a moment, trying to understand what he was really asking for. "Fine. You're brilliant at what you do, that much is obvious. Your company has revolutionized cardiac care, and your research division is developing medications that will save thousands of lives. But you treat your employees like they're obstacles rather than assets. Fear might generate short-term compliance, but it kills creativity and loyalty. Eventually, you'll lose your best people because they'll decide the paycheck is not worth the stress." Julian was quiet for so long that Grace wondered if she had crossed a line. Then he stood, walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. "My father built this company from nothing," he said quietly. "He was brilliant, charismatic, and kind to everyone he met. He trusted the wrong people. They stole his research, manipulated the board, and forced him out of his own company. He died 2 years later, broken and betrayed. I spent 10 years fighting to regain control, to restore his legacy. I learned that trust is a liability. Kindness is weakness. The only way to protect what matters is to control everything." Grace felt unexpected sympathy bloom in her chest. She understood trauma, understood how it shaped people into versions of themselves they might never have chosen to become. "Control is an illusion," she said gently. "You can't control everything, no matter how hard you try, but you can choose who you trust. You can build something better than what was taken from you." He turned back to face her, and something in his expression had softened. "You're not afraid of me, should I be? Most people are. I've faced down armed assailants, navigated diplomatic incidents, and once talked a drunk celebrity out of driving his Ferrari into a swimming pool. You're intense, Mr. Pierce, but you're not frightening." That almost smile appeared again, lasting a fraction longer this time. "Call me Julian. If we're going to spend every day together, excessive formality seems impractical." "Grace," she replied, offering her first name in return. Something had shifted between them in that quiet office, some understanding reached that went beyond employer and employee. Grace felt it but did not examine it too closely. She was there to do a job, nothing more. The following weeks settled into a rhythm. Grace arrived each morning at 8:30, reviewed overnight security reports, and then shadowed Julian through his relentless schedule. Board meetings, laboratory tours, conference calls with international distributors, presentations to potential investors. The man never seemed to stop, never seemed to slow down, and he was exactly as difficult as advertised. Grace watched him tear apart a marketing proposal because the font choice was uninspired. She witnessed a 45-minute argument over the temperature in the conference room. She heard him dismiss ideas from experienced executives with cutting precision. But she also noticed something else, something that seemed to escape everyone else's attention. Julian was different with her. It started small. A cup of coffee appearing on her desk, prepared exactly how she liked it, though she had never told him her preference. He had simply observed and remembered. Questions about her opinion on matters that had nothing to do with security. A genuine interest in her thoughts. "What do you think of the new packaging design?" he asked one afternoon, showing her mock-ups for a medication bottle. "I'm not sure my opinion is relevant. I don't have a background in pharmaceutical marketing." "You have eyes and a brain. That makes your opinion relevant." Grace studied the designs, aware of him watching her. "The blue one. It's cleaner, easier to read. The elderly demographic that uses this medication will appreciate the larger font." He nodded, making a note. "That's what I thought too. Everyone else voted for the red one because it's bold and attention-getting, but this medication is for heart failure patients. They don't need bold. They need clarity and trustworthiness." It was the kind of detail that revealed the man beneath the demanding exterior. Julian Pierce might be difficult, but he was difficult because he cared intensely about the work, about getting every detail right, about the patients who depended on his company's products. Grace saw other things too. The way he personally reviewed every adverse event report, no matter how minor. How he knew the names of the cleaning staff and asked about their families. The charitable foundation he ran that provided free medications to uninsured patients, something he never mentioned publicly and actively avoided discussing with the press. "Why do you hide it?" she asked one evening when they were alone in his office. She had noticed a thank-you letter from a mother whose daughter's life had been saved by the foundation's assistance. "Hide what?" "The foundation. The fact that you give away millions in free medications every year." Most billionaires would be shouting that from the rooftops. Julian looked uncomfortable, an unusual expression on his typically controlled face. "It's not about publicity. It's about my father's belief that healthcare is a human right. The company can afford it and people need help. That's all that matters." Grace felt her carefully maintained professional distance waver slightly. This man was nothing like the tabloid image, nothing like the cold tyrant everyone believed him to be. He was complex, damaged, and far more compassionate than he wanted anyone to know. The following week brought the Spring Pharmaceutical Conference, a massive industry event held at a hotel in Midtown. Grace had argued against Julian attending. The crowds and public venue created too many security vulnerabilities, but he had been adamant. Pierce Holdings was unveiling a new medication, and he insisted on presenting it himself. The ballroom was packed with hundreds of industry professionals, journalists, and potential investors. Grace positioned herself near the stage, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd, looking for threats, for anything out of place. Julian delivered his presentation with the same intensity he brought to everything, his passion for the science evident in every word. During the question and answer session, a man in the third row stood up. Grace's instincts prickled before he even spoke. Mr. Pierce, how do you respond to allegations that your company prioritizes profit over patient safety? The man's voice was aggressive, confrontational. Julian remained calm. We have the highest safety standards in the industry. Every medication undergoes rigorous testing, and we maintain transparency with regulatory agencies. That's not what the families of patients who died after taking your products would say. The room went silent. Grace was already moving, signaling to her team. She had researched this man, Bradley Morrison, father of a young woman who had died from an undiagnosed heart condition. He blamed Pierce Holdings, despite multiple investigations clearing the company of any wrongdoing. "Mr. Morrison," Julian said quietly, "I am deeply sorry for your loss. Your daughter's death was a tragedy. But as the medical examiner determined, she had an underlying condition that was unrelated to our medication. You're lying. You killed her and you're covering it up." Morrison lunged toward the stage. Grace intercepted him smoothly, using minimal force to redirect his momentum and position herself between him and Julian. Hotel security arrived seconds later, but Grace maintained her grip until Morrison was safely restrained. "It's all right," Julian said, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Mr. Morrison is grieving. I understand his pain." The conference continued, but Grace stayed on high alert. After it concluded, she accompanied Julian back to his car, an armored sedan waiting in the underground garage. "That was well handled," Julian said once they were safely inside. "It's my job." You could have heard him. He was clearly unstable and potentially dangerous, but you controlled the situation without causing him any harm. Grace glanced at him. "He's a grieving father looking for someone to blame. He didn't deserve to be hurt." Julian was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes reflecting the passing streetlights. "How do you do it?" "Do what?" "See the humanity in people, even in difficult circumstances." "I look at situations and see problems to solve, obstacles to overcome. You see people." "Maybe that's because you've trained yourself not to see them," Grace said carefully. "It's a defense mechanism. If you don't see them as people, it hurts less when they disappoint you or betray you." He turned to fully face her, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "You have me completely figured out, don't you?" "I wouldn't say that. You're not an easy man to figure out, Julian." The use of his first name felt intimate in the close confines of the car. Grace realized how much time they had been spending together, how many conversations they had shared that went far beyond security protocols and scheduling. "I find myself wanting to be less difficult," he said quietly. "At least with you." Grace's heart rate kicked up, a physiological response she tried to ignore. "You're not that difficult. I made 3 people cry today before the conference even started. You're under tremendous pressure. You're responsible for thousands of employees and millions of patients who depend on your company's medications. That kind of weight would make anyone intense. You're making excuses for me. I'm trying to understand you. There's a difference." The car pulled up to Julian's building, a luxury high-rise in Tribeca. Grace performed her usual security check, clearing the lobby and elevator before allowing him to enter. She accompanied him to his penthouse, a sprawling space with minimalist decor and breathtaking views. "Stay for a drink," Julian said, and it sounded more like a request than a command. Grace knew she should decline. She was an employee, nothing more. But something in his expression, a vulnerability she rarely saw, made her nod. Julian poured 2 glasses of wine, an expensive vintage that Grace did not recognize. They sat in the living room, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the windows. "Tell me something about yourself," Julian said. "Something that's not in your personnel file." Grace considered the question. "I have a younger brother. He's a teacher in Boston. We talk every Sunday. Are you close? Very. Our parents died when I was 19. I raised him while putting myself through college and security training. He's the reason I went into protection. I couldn't protect our parents from a drunk driver, but I could make sure other people had someone watching over them. Julian's expression softened. I'm sorry about your parents. It was a long time ago. We survived. We built good lives. She paused, then asked, What about you? Do you have siblings? A sister? Rebecca. She's a doctor, works for Doctors Without Borders. We're not close. She thinks I sold out, that I should have taken the company in a more humanitarian direction instead of focusing on profit margins. Did you sell out? No. I balance profit with purpose, but Rebecca only sees what she wants to see. His jaw tightened. She thinks I've become like the people who destroyed our father. Grace set down her wine glass. You're nothing like those people. You're trying to protect something you love. That's not betrayal. That's loyalty. Julian looked at her with such intensity that Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. You defend me. I defend the truth. Most people just tell me what they think I want to hear. I'm not most people. No, he said softly. You're absolutely not. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Grace did not want to name. She stood abruptly, breaking the spell. I should go. You have an early meeting tomorrow. Julian stood as well, moving closer than was strictly professional. Grace. She looked up at him, her heart pounding. Yes, thank you for today. For every day, actually, you make this more bearable. She managed a smile, though her pulse was racing. Good night, Julian. Grace left the penthouse feeling shaken. She had protected dozens of clients, maintained professional boundaries with all of them. But something about Julian Pierce was getting under her skin, making her feel things she had no business feeling. The situation grew more complicated over the following weeks. Julian's behavior toward her became increasingly warm, increasingly personal, while his treatment of others remained as harsh as ever. Grace watched him eviscerate a director during a board meeting over a minor procedural error, then turned to her afterward and asked if she wanted to grab lunch. You know you were really hard on David, Grace said as they sat in a quiet restaurant near the office. Julian had insisted on a place with a private booth, claiming it was for security purposes, but Grace suspected other motivations. David has been with the company for 12 years. He knows our protocols. Everyone makes mistakes. Not at that level, not with that much experience. Grace set down her fork. Why are you like this with them but different with me? Julian was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. Because you're different. How? You don't want anything from me. Everyone else wants something. A promotion, approval, money, access. You just do your job and treat me like a person instead of an ATM or a stepping stone. They might treat you better if you treated them better. Probably. But I can't risk it. Can't risk trusting them. But you trust me. I do, completely. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. I trust you with my life, obviously, but also with other things. My thoughts, my doubts, things I don't share with anyone. Grace felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. Julian, I'm your employee, I know. This is complicated. I know that too. We should keep things professional, you're right. But he did not look away, did not retreat. Tell me you don't feel it too. Tell me I'm imagining this connection between us, and I'll never mention it again. Grace could not say those words because they would be a lie. She felt it every time he looked at her, every time they talked about something beyond work, every time she noticed him being gentle with her when he was harsh with everyone else. I can't tell you that, she said quietly. Julian reached across the table, his hand covering hers. The touch sent electricity through her entire body. Then what do we do? I don't know. They sat like that for a moment, hands touching, the world narrowing to just the two of them. Then Grace's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. A security alert. A suspicious package had been delivered to the office. They rushed back immediately, Grace's training taking over. The package was intercepted, investigated, and ultimately determined to be harmless, a marketing sample from a supplier. But the incident reminded Grace of why she was there, what her actual job entailed. That evening, alone in her apartment, Grace called her brother. "You sound stressed," Danny said after they had exchanged pleasantries. "Work is complicated. The difficult CEO." She had mentioned Julian in passing during their weekly calls. "He's not as difficult as everyone says. Actually, he's kind of amazing when you get to know him." Danny was quiet for a beat. "Grace, please tell me you're not falling for a client." "I'm not," she said automatically, then sighed. "Maybe I am. I don't know. You've never had this problem before. What's different about this guy?" "Everything. He's brilliant, Danny, and yes, he's demanding and intense, but there's so much more to him. He runs a foundation that helps people who can't afford medications. He cares deeply about doing the right thing, and with me, he's different. He's open and honest and vulnerable in a way he's not with anyone else." "Does he feel the same way?" "I think so, but it's complicated. I work for him. There's a power dynamic." "Then one of you needs to change that dynamic. Either you find a new job, or he needs to make it clear that any relationship would be between equals, not employer and employee." Grace knew her brother was right. But the thought of leaving, of not seeing Julian every day, made her chest ache in a way that told her she was already in far deeper than was wise. The next morning, Julian called her into his office before the day's meetings began. He looked like he had not slept, his hair disheveled, his tie not quite straight. It was so unlike his usual polished appearance that Grace felt immediate concern. "Is everything all right?" "No," he said bluntly. "Nothing is all right. I can't stop thinking about you, Grace. I can't focus on work. I can't sleep. This is not sustainable." Grace's heart hammered against her ribs. "Julian, let me finish, please." He moved around his desk, standing in front of her but maintaining a respectful distance. "I know this is inappropriate. You work for me. There's a power imbalance. You could feel pressured or uncomfortable. The last thing I want is to make your job difficult or put you in an awkward position." "Then, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I need to know if this is one-sided, if I'm alone in feeling this connection between us. Because if I am, I'll never mention it again. We'll maintain a professional relationship and I'll deal with my feelings on my own. But if you feel it too, then we need to figure out how to handle this properly." Grace looked at him, this brilliant, damaged, complicated man who had somehow worked his way into her heart. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a bad idea. Office romances were risky. Relationships with clients were forbidden in most security firms. She could lose her job, her reputation, everything she had built. But standing there, looking into Julian's dark eyes and seeing the vulnerability and hope there, she knew rationality had already lost this battle. "You're not alone," she said quietly. "I feel it too." The relief that washed over his face was almost painful to witness. "Then we do this right. Today, I'm calling the board. I'm officially removing you from the payroll as an employee and hiring your firm as an independent contractor. You'll report to the head of corporate security, not to me." That eliminates the power dynamic. "That's not necessary." "It absolutely is necessary. I won't have anyone question your professionalism or suggest that your job is dependent on personal factors. You're brilliant at what you do, Grace. Your position should be based solely on your skills, nothing else." Grace felt her throat tighten with emotion. He was protecting her reputation and career, even as he was admitting his feelings. It was so characteristic of who he really was beneath the difficult exterior. Okay, she said. Restructure the position. Do whatever you need to do to make this right. And then we see where this goes, slowly, carefully. Julian smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. I can do slow and careful, can you? Because you're not exactly known for patience. For you, I'll learn. The restructuring took 2 days. Julian met with the board, with HR, with the legal department. Grace's contract was transferred to her security firm, who then contracted her services to Pierce Holdings. She reported to the VP of Corporate Security, a former FBI agent named Patricia who had been thrilled with the arrangement. Frankly, I'm glad you'll be reporting to me, Patricia had said. Pierce is a good man, but he's intense. You've done wonders with him. He's actually been pleasant lately. I heard him thank someone yesterday. I nearly fell over. Grace had laughed, but she had noticed the changes too. Julian was making an effort to be less harsh with his staff. He still had high standards, still demanded excellence, but he was learning to deliver criticism constructively rather than destructively. Grace says I need to work on my people's skills, he had announced during a senior leadership meeting. She's right. I'm going to try to be less of an asshole. You all have permission to call me out if I'm being unreasonable. The room had gone silent with shock. Then someone had laughed, and the tension had broken. Their first official date happened on a Friday evening. Julian had made reservations at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, far from the Manhattan spots where they might run into business associates. Grace wore a blue dress instead of her usual tactical gear, and the way Julian's eyes had widened when he saw her made her feel beautiful in a way she had not experienced in years. You look incredible, he said, his voice slightly rough. You clean up pretty well yourself. He was wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt, no tie, more casual than she had ever seen him. It made him look younger, less like the intense CEO and more like just a man hoping to impress the woman he liked. Dinner was easy, comfortable. They talked about everything except work. Grace learned that Julian loved old jazz music and terrible action movies. He discovered that she had a weakness for mystery novels and could not cook to save her life. I can barely manage toast, she admitted. It's embarrassing. I'll cook for you, Julian offered. I'm actually pretty good in the kitchen. It's one of the few places where I can turn my brain off and just focus on the task. The great Julian Pierce, finding peace in chopping vegetables. Don't mock my coping mechanisms. Grace laughed, and the sound felt free and genuine. She realized how much she had been holding back, how much energy she had spent maintaining professional boundaries. This felt right, natural, like something that had been inevitable from the moment they met. After dinner, they walked along the Brooklyn waterfront, the Manhattan skyline glowing across the water. Julian took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, and Grace felt a surge of contentment she had not known she was missing. I need to tell you something, Julian said as they paused near the railing. I haven't done this in a long time. Dating, relationships. After my father died and I spent years fighting to reclaim the company, I shut myself off. It was easier to be alone than to risk trusting someone who might betray me. You don't have to explain, I want to. I want you to understand that this, you and me, it's important to me. It's frightening, honestly. Caring about someone, letting them matter. But I've spent enough years being closed off and difficult. I don't want to be that person anymore. At least, not with you. Grace squeezed his hand. I'm scared too. I've spent my entire adult life protecting other people. I'm not used to letting someone in, to being vulnerable. Then we'll figure it out together. We'll probably make mistakes. Definitely we'll make mistakes. But we'll try. That's worth something, right? Grace stood on her toes and kissed him, a soft press of lips that somehow conveyed everything she could not quite put into words. Julian's arms came around her, pulling her close, and for a moment the world fell away. The following months were a revelation. Grace continued her work, maintaining Julian's security while navigating this new dimension of their relationship. It was not always easy. There were awkward moments when her professional judgment conflicted with personal feelings, when protecting him meant limiting his movements in ways that frustrated him. "I understand the threat is credible," Julian said one afternoon when Grace had insisted he cancel a public appearance. "But I can't hide every time someone makes a vague threat." This was not vague. "The individual has a history of violence and was spotted near your building. So we increase security. But I'm not canceling." Grace felt her patience fray. "I'm trying to keep you safe. I know. But I also have a company to run and responsibilities that can't be postponed every time someone makes me nervous." They had argued, the first real fight of their relationship. It had ended with Grace threatening to resign, and Julian apologizing for undermining her professional authority. They had established new protocols, better communication, clearer boundaries between personal and professional, but there were beautiful moments too. Julian cooking dinner in her apartment, jazz playing softly in the background, moving around her tiny kitchen with surprising grace. Grace teaching him self-defense moves in his private gym, laughing when he tried to flip her and ended up flat on his back. Quiet evenings reading together, her mysteries and his scientific journals, comfortable in shared silence. Grace met his sister Rebecca during a rare visit to New York. The meeting had been tense at first, Rebecca clearly protective of her brother and suspicious of Grace's intentions. "He's been hurt before," Rebecca had said bluntly when Julian left them alone for a moment. "People see the money and the power, and they want a piece of it." "I don't want his money," Grace replied calmly. "I have my own career and my own life. I want Julian because he's brilliant and passionate and because he makes me want to be better than I am." Rebecca had studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "He's different with you, softer. I haven't seen him this happy in years. He makes me happy too." They had not become best friends, but they had reached an understanding. Rebecca returned to her humanitarian work, but her emails to Julian became more frequent, their relationship slowly healing. Julian met Danny during Thanksgiving. Grace had been nervous about the meeting, worried that her practical-minded teacher brother and her intense CEO boyfriend would not mesh well. Instead, they had bonded over a shared love of bad puns and science fiction novels. "He's good for you," Danny said as he helped Grace with dishes while Julian was on a work call. "I've never seen you this relaxed, this happy." "I love him," Grace said, the first time she had admitted it out loud to anyone. "I'm completely in love with him. Does he know?" "Not yet. I'm waiting for the right moment." That moment came 2 weeks later. Grace had been reviewing security footage when she noticed something unusual, a pattern in the delivery schedules that did not quite add up. She dug deeper, following a hunch, and uncovered evidence of corporate espionage. Someone inside Pierce Holdings was leaking proprietary research data to a competitor. The investigation took 3 weeks. Grace worked with Patricia and an outside security firm, carefully tracking the leak to its source. When they finally identified the culprit, a senior research director named Thomas, who had been with the company for 8 years, Grace felt sick. She knew this betrayal would devastate Julian. She waited until they were alone in his office to tell him, presenting the evidence carefully, giving him time to process. Julian sat in silence for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he stood and walked to the windows, his back to her. "Julian, I trusted him. He worked with my father. He was there when we were rebuilding the company." His voice was tight with pain. I thought I had learned my lesson about trust. Grace moved to stand beside him. You can't let this make you close off again. Most people are good, Julian. Thomas made a terrible choice, but that doesn't mean everyone will betray you. How do you know? How can you be sure? I can't. That's what trust is, taking a leap of faith and hoping the other person catches you. She took his hand. But I can promise you this. I will never betray you. I will never leak your secrets or use your vulnerabilities against you. I'm here because I want to be, because I love you, and nothing will change that. Julian turned sharply to face her. What did you say? Grace realized what she had revealed, but she did not take it back. I love you. I'm in love with you. I probably have been for months, but I was too scared to admit it. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I love you too. God, Grace, I love you so much it terrifies me. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the windows. The betrayal still hurt. Thomas still had to be dealt with, but somehow it felt more bearable knowing they would face it together. Thomas was arrested the following week. The evidence was overwhelming, and he had eventually confessed to selling research data for over a year. Julian testified during the preliminary hearings, his pain visible but controlled. Grace was there for every moment, a quiet presence of support. The incident changed something in Julian. He became more open with his senior staff, more willing to show vulnerability. He started therapy, working through the trauma of his father's betrayal and death. Grace saw him transform slowly, not losing his intensity or his passion, but channeling it more constructively. You were right, he told her one evening as they sat in his penthouse. About control being an illusion. I can't protect myself from betrayal by shutting everyone out. I just end up alone and miserable. You're not alone anymore. No, I have you. He turned to face her fully. Move in with me. Grace blinked in surprise. What? Move in? Your apartment is tiny and in a questionable neighborhood. I have plenty of space. We spend most nights together anyway. It makes sense. Julian, that's a big step. I know, but I'm ready for it if you are. I want to wake up with you every morning. I want to come home to you every evening. I want to build a life with you, Grace. Grace felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, I'll move in with you. The logistics took a few weeks, but by Christmas, Grace was fully settled into the penthouse. It felt surreal sometimes, going from her small studio to this sprawling space with its museum-quality art and stunning views. But Julian made it feel like home, clearing closet space for her clothes, setting up a reading nook with perfect lighting, even installing a better security system at her request. They hosted Christmas dinner, inviting Danny and Rebecca and a few of Julian's close colleagues. Grace cooked nothing. Julian and Rebecca handled the meal, but she decorated the penthouse with lights and a tree, making it feel festive and warm. To family, Julian toasted as they gathered around the table. Both the one we're born with and the one we choose. Grace met his eyes across the table and saw her entire future reflected there. The new year brought new challenges. Pierce Holdings launched its revolutionary new cardiac medication, a drug that promised to significantly reduce heart failure mortality. The launch was massive, involving international distribution, regulatory approvals in multiple countries, and a marketing campaign that reached millions. Grace coordinated security for the global press tour, traveling with Julian to London, Tokyo, and Berlin. It was exhausting and exhilarating, watching him present his father's legacy to the world, seeing the passion and purpose that drove him. In Tokyo, after a particularly grueling day of interviews and presentations, they escaped to a quiet temple garden. The spring cherry blossoms were in full bloom, petals drifting like snow. My father would have loved this, Julian said softly. The medication bearing his name, helping people all over the world. He would be proud of you. I hope so. I've made so many mistakes, been so focused on control and protection that I almost lost sight of why any of this matters. Grace took his hand. You found your way back. That's what counts. Julian turned to her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. I found my way because of you. You saw who I really was beneath all the defense mechanisms. You challenged me to be better. You loved me even when I was difficult and closed off. You made it easy. Once I got past the grumpy exterior, you were pretty irresistible. He laughed, then grew serious. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Grace. I want to build something real and lasting. I want everything with you. Then he was kneeling in the cherry blossom petals, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Grace's heart stopped. Grace Everett, you are the strongest, most capable, most compassionate person I have ever known. You make me want to be the man you see when you look at me. Will you marry me? The ring was beautiful, a simple platinum band with a single perfect diamond, but Grace barely saw it through her tears. Yes, she managed. Yes, absolutely yes. Julian stood and kissed her, and the world fell away into cherry blossoms and joy and the certainty of a shared future. They married 6 months later in a small ceremony at a vineyard upstate. No press, no business associates, just family and close friends. Danny walked Grace down the aisle. Rebecca served as Julian's best woman. Patricia caught the bouquet and declared it a sign she needed to start dating again. Julian's vows made Grace cry. He spoke about darkness and light, about walls and doors, about a woman who had refused to be intimidated by his reputation and had instead seen through to his heart. Grace's vows were simpler. I promise to protect you, to challenge you, to love you even when you're being difficult. I promise to be your safe place, your home, your partner in everything. I choose you, Julian, today and every day for the rest of our lives. They honeymooned in New Zealand, 2 weeks of hiking and exploring, and being completely disconnected from work. Grace had never seen Julian so relaxed, so genuinely happy. They talked about the future, about the life they wanted to build together. I want kids, Julian said one evening as they watched the sunset over the southern Alps. I want to be a better father than I had, to teach them about purpose and passion without passing on the damage. You'll be an amazing father, Grace assured him. You've already proven you can grow and change. That's what matters. What about you? Do you want children? I do. 2, maybe 3. A family. Julian pulled her close. Then that's what we'll build. A family. A real one built on trust and love. 2 years later, Grace gave birth to their daughter, Elena. Julian was there for every moment of the labor, holding Grace's hand, whispering encouragement, crying when he first held his daughter. Grace watched him with Elena, saw the tenderness and wonder in his eyes, and fell in love with him all over again. He was a devoted father, present despite his demanding schedule, choosing to work from home more often, delegating responsibilities he once would have micromanaged. Pierce Holdings continued to thrive, but Julian's leadership style had completely transformed. The company was regularly listed as one of the best places to work, with high employee satisfaction and low turnover. The difficult CEO had become known for his mentorship and his commitment to work-life balance. You civilized me, Julian joked one evening as they gave Elena her bath. Their daughter splashed happily, her dark eyes so like her father's. You civilized yourself, Grace corrected. I just gave you a reason to try. 3 years after Elena came their son, Marcus, named after the nervous assistant who had first introduced Grace to Julian. Marcus, the assistant, had long since been promoted to director of operations, and was thriving under Julian's new management style. Their life was full and chaotic and beautiful. Grace still worked in security, now running her own firm that specialized in corporate protection. She had hired a team of talented professionals and could choose her assignments carefully, prioritizing projects that allowed her to be present for her family. Julian had stepped back from day-to-day operations, focusing on research and development while trusting his executive team to handle the business side. He served on several nonprofit boards, expanding his father's foundation and funding initiatives that made healthcare more accessible. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they returned to the Brooklyn restaurant where they had their first date. They had left the children with Danny and his wife, stealing a rare evening alone. "You remember that first day?" Julian asked as they shared tiramisu. "When I told you that you were late even though you weren't. You were such a pain," Grace laughed. "I seriously considered quitting after the first hour." "What stopped you? Curiosity, maybe, or stubbornness? I kept seeing glimpses of someone interesting beneath the difficult exterior. I wanted to understand you. And now that you do," Grace reached across the table and took his hand. "Now I love you even more than I did then, which I did not think was possible. You're an amazing husband, an incredible father, and still the most passionate, driven person I have ever known." "You just channel it better now." Julian raised her hand to his lips. "I was drowning before you, Grace, drowning in anger and control and fear. You taught me to breathe again. You saved me. We saved each other." They walked along the waterfront after dinner, just as they had on that first date years ago. The Manhattan skyline still glittered across the water, but everything else had changed. They were no longer two guarded people cautiously exploring a connection. They were partners, parents, best friends who had built something beautiful together. "You ever miss it?" Julian asked. "The excitement of your old job, presidents and celebrities and constant danger?" Grace considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss the adrenaline. But I wouldn't trade what we have for anything. Coming home to you and the kids, building a life together, that's the real adventure. Even when Alina draws on the walls and Marcus refuses to sleep, and I'm stressed about the quarterly earnings, especially then. The messy, complicated, everyday parts. That's real life, Julian. That's love." He pulled her close, kissing her softly. "I love our life. Me too." They stood there for a long time, holding each other as the city lights sparkled and the water lapped against the shore. Grace thought about the woman she had been 5 years ago, walking into Julian's office expecting another difficult assignment. She could never have imagined this depth of love and partnership, this beautiful family they had created together. Julian had been difficult, that part of his reputation had been accurate. But beneath the harsh exterior had been a man worth fighting for, worth loving, worth building a life with. Grace had seen what others missed, had chosen to look deeper, and that choice had given her everything she had never known she wanted. "Ready to go home?" Julian asked, his voice soft against her hair. "Always. Let's go home." They walked back to the car hand in hand, talking about their children, their work, their plans for the weekend. It was ordinary and perfect, exactly the kind of moment Grace treasured most. At home, they relieved Danny and his wife, who reported that both children had been angels and were sleeping peacefully. Grace suspected this was a generous interpretation, but she appreciated the kindness. She and Julian checked on Alina and Marcus, watching them sleep in their respective rooms. Alina clutched her stuffed elephant. Marcus had somehow ended up sideways in his crib. They were perfect, these children they had made together, these tiny humans who carried the best parts of both of them. In their own bedroom, Grace changed into comfortable pajamas while Julian went through his evening routine. It was domestic and mundane and exactly what she wanted. "Grace," Julian's voice came from the bathroom. "Yeah, thank you." She walked to the doorway. "For what?" for seeing me, for loving me, for building this life with me. His eyes were serious, full of the emotion he no longer tried to hide, for being exactly who you are. Grace moved into his arms, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me enough to be vulnerable, for becoming the man I always knew you could be. They stood like that for a moment, wrapped in each other and in the quiet certainty of their love. Then Marcus started crying, probably another nightmare, and Alina called out asking for water. "I'll get Marcus," Julian said. "I'll handle Alina." They separated to tend to their children, partners in this beautiful chaos they had created. Grace brought Alina water and read her another story, tucking her back in with kisses. From the nursery, she could hear Julian's deep voice singing a lullaby, slightly off-key but full of love. Eventually, both children settled back to sleep. Grace and Julian met in the hallway, exhausted but happy. "Parenthood is not for the weak," Julian said. "Good thing we're both pretty strong." They returned to their room and climbed into bed, Grace curling into Julian's side, his arm coming around her automatically. This was her favorite part of the day, these quiet moments where the world narrowed to just the two of them. "I love you," Julian murmured, already half asleep. "I love you too." Grace lay awake for a few more minutes, listening to Julian's breathing even out, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that first contentious meeting to this peaceful domestic bliss. It had not always been easy. They had both had walls to break down, fears to overcome, patterns to change. But they had done the work together, supporting each other through the difficult parts, celebrating the victories, building something real and lasting. Julian had been difficult, yes, but he had also been worth it. And Grace had been brave enough to look past the surface, patient enough to wait for him to open up, strong enough to challenge him when he needed it. Together, they had created something beautiful, a love story that had started with professional duty and grown into genuine partnership. Grace smiled in the darkness, pressed a kiss to Julian's shoulder, and let herself drift off to sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Their story had started with her being assigned to guard a difficult CEO. It had evolved into so much more, a love that had transformed them both, a family that filled their lives with purpose and joy, a partnership that would last the rest of their lives. Julian was still demanding, still intense, still passionate about everything he did. But he was no longer difficult, at least not in the ways that mattered. He had learned to channel his intensity into building rather than controlling, into connecting rather than defending. And Grace had learned that sometimes the most rewarding assignments were the ones that changed you, that challenged your assumptions, that opened your heart to possibilities you had never considered. She had been hired to protect Julian's life. Instead, she had found her own life transformed in ways she could never have predicted. It was the best assignment she had ever accepted, and it would last a lifetime. As Grace finally fell asleep beside her husband, surrounded by the quiet sounds of their family, she knew that this was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not always easy, but real and true and absolutely worth fighting for. Their love story was not the kind told in fairy tales. It was better because it was real, built on mutual respect and genuine partnership, on seeing each other clearly and choosing to love what they saw. Julian had been difficult with everyone except her, and she had noticed. That attention, that difference, had been the beginning of everything. Now, years later, they had built a life that honored both of them, that made space for Julian's intensity and Grace's strength, that celebrated their children and their work and their deep, abiding love for each other. It was a happy ending that was really just a beginning, the start of decades of partnership and growth and love. And somewhere in the night, as the city continued its restless movement around them, Julian and Grace Everett Pierce slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had found what everyone searches for: a love that sees you truly, challenges you to grow, and chooses you day after day for the rest of your life.